Each of us, without exception, has encountered lies. Perhaps it was something minor of little significance, like a harmless white lie when you tell a friend their new dress looks great even though it doesn't quite suit them. Or when, in response to a question about how you're feeling, you automatically say, "Everything's great," even if inside you feel completely drained after a tough workday, simply because you don't want to burden the person you're talking to with your problems. Such situations where we slightly distort reality are commonplace. A friend might be late for a meeting and, instead of honestly saying, "I overslept," invents a story about sudden traffic jams or an urgent call that couldn't be ignored. A colleague at work promises to do something by a certain deadline, but then it turns out they had no intention of fulfilling that obligation, simply trying to avoid an awkward refusal or admitting their workload. But sometimes lies can be much more serious, affecting important aspects of life, and then they leave a much deeper mark. For example, when a loved one hides their financial problems, creating an illusion of prosperity while debts pile up, eventually affecting the entire family. Or when someone in your family conceals important events that directly impact your future, such as relocation plans or serious health issues. Such lies destroy trust and can lead to serious consequences for all involved. This could also be a situation in personal relationships, where a partner hides something significant. For instance, their true feelings, past relationships, or even a double life. Deception in business, when you're promised mountains of gold, but are actually offered nothing, or political promises that turn out to be mere election slogans. All these are examples of lies we encounter that have real, tangible consequences. The feeling of being deceived is unpleasant and raises many questions. It can range from mild annoyance, when you realize you've been lied to about something minor, to deep disappointment, bitterness, and even pain if the lie touched something truly important. When you start to suspect that a person's words don't align with the truth, it's as if a small bell inside you signals, "Something isn't right here." This bell can be a faint whisper of doubt that makes you listen to intonations, analyze gestures, or a loud alarm that makes your heart beat faster and your mind frantically re-examine all the facts. You start replaying everything said in your mind, looking for inconsistencies in the story, analyzing the person's behavior, their gaze, posture, words. And the stronger your suspicions, the greater the discomfort grows. Perhaps you feel betrayed, deceived, foolish for not noticing sooner, or simply bewildered, unsure how to react to what's happening. This sense of uncertainty and betrayal of trust can be very painful, as it undermines the foundation of any relationship, be it friendship, love, partnership, or even simple communication. At this moment, the desire to understand arises. Why did this happen? Why was I lied to? And what should I do now? And here arises the main question that troubles many. Why do people lie at all? What drives them when they decide to hide the truth or distort it? The answer to this question is much more complex than it seems at first glance, and it rarely boils down to a simple desire to cause harm or conscious malice. In most cases, lying is not a manifestation of absolute evil, but rather a complex and multifaceted psychological mechanism that is triggered in various, sometimes unexpected, situations. It is a kind of defense mechanism, an attempt to cope with certain circumstances, emotions, or even internal conflicts that seem too complex, dangerous, or insoluble for a direct approach. Lying becomes a tool for adaptation, though not always effective and often destructive in the long term. Let's delve into the psychological reasons for this behavior to better understand the motives behind insincerity. One of the most common and understandable reasons is, of course, fear. Fear of punishment, fear of judgment, fear of losing something important: status, a job, money, relationships, love, respect. Recall a small child who has drawn on freshly wallpapered walls with markers. When their parents approach them with the question, "Who did this?" their instinctive reaction will likely be, "It wasn't me," or "Name of cat/dog/imaginary friend did it." They are not trying to be malicious or cause harm. They are simply afraid of being scolded, having their cartoons taken away, being forbidden from playing their favorite game, or being punished in some other way. For them, lying at that moment is the simplest and quickest way to avoid unpleasant consequences, which, from their perspective, could be catastrophic. And this pattern of behavior, established in childhood when lying helped avoid punishment or discomfort, often carries over into adulthood, simply manifesting in more sophisticated and covert forms. An adult, for example, might lie about their mistakes at work to avoid a reprimand, loss of bonus, or even dismissal. Imagine an employee who made a serious blunder on an important project. Instead of confessing immediately, they might try to conceal their mistake, embellish results, or even blame external circumstances, fearing a negative reaction from their superiors and colleagues. Or another example, a person hides their growing debts from their spouse, fearing their disapproval, disappointment, and loss of trust, which could lead to the breakdown of the family. They might continue to create an appearance of financial well-being, hoping that somehow everything will work itself out, but in reality, only exacerbating the problem. Here, lying becomes a shield against potentially painful confrontation or undesirable consequences. Sometimes, lying stems from a desire to protect oneself or someone else from pain, suffering, or undesirable emotions. Imagine a situation where your close friend received a rejection from their dream job, which they had strived for so long and hard. Knowing how upset and broken they are, you might lie to their parents or mutual acquaintances, saying that there's no news yet or everything is going according to plan, simply to avoid upsetting them or making your friend relive the situation by explaining it to everyone. This is not malicious lying, but rather a lie of omission, though the concept itself is debatable, dictated by care and a desire to shield another from emotional distress. Another example is when doctors or close relatives conceal the full extent of a serious illness from a patient, trying to preserve their peace of mind and hope. The purpose of such a lie is to minimize pain and suffering, to allow the person to live out their remaining time as peacefully as possible. However, even such noble lies can have their pitfalls. Sooner or later, the truth will still come out, and then trust may be damaged, and the person who was deceived may feel even more alone and betrayed. This is a very fine line, and the decision to tell such a lie is always fraught with ethical dilemmas. Another common reason is an attempt to look better in the eyes of others, also known as impression management. All of us, to some extent, want to be valued, respected, loved, and admired. Sometimes people embellish their achievements, exaggerate their abilities, or hide their flaws to create a more favorable impression on the interlocutor, be it a potential employer, partner, friends, or just new acquaintances. For example, someone might talk about their incredible sporting successes, even though in reality they only went to the gym a couple of times a year and achieved no outstanding results. Or they might invent exciting stories about their travels that were actually much more mundane and lacked drama. This is not always a malicious distortion of reality. Rather, it is an attempt to conform to a certain ideal that the person has created for themselves, or that, as they believe, others expect from them. In the modern world, where social media encourages the creation of an ideal, filtered image of life, such image lying is becoming increasingly common. People can feel immense pressure to be successful, happy, constantly busy, traveling, interesting, and if reality does not meet these inflated expectations, it's easier to embellish it a little than to face potential judgment, disappointment, or even a sense of inadequacy. They fear that their true self will not be good enough to be accepted or loved. Sometimes lying is a way to avoid conflict or awkwardness. In everyday life, we constantly face situations where telling the truth can be uncomfortable or unpleasant. For example, if you've been invited to an event you absolutely don't want to attend, instead of saying no directly and honestly, potentially offending the person or causing an awkward conversation, you might come up with some excuse. "Oh, I already have other plans," or "I suddenly felt unwell." This is a lie aimed at maintaining social connections and avoiding direct confrontation or uncomfortable explanations. Similarly, people might lie to their partners about minor things, such as how much they spent on a purchase, to avoid an argument or disapproval. Of course, such lies can be convenient in the short term, allowing one to avoid immediate discomfort, but in the long term, they can create distance and distrust as people sense when they are being avoided or when they are not being told the truth, even if they cannot articulate it. Lying can also be linked to low self-esteem and inner insecurity. A person who doesn't believe in themselves, their strengths, and their worth might lie about their abilities, achievements, or even their past to compensate for this inner insecurity. They might think, if I tell the truth about who I really am, I won't be valued, I'll be laughed at, I'll be rejected, and so they choose lying as a way to gain approval, attention, or avoid criticism. This is a form of self-defense, but it creates a vicious cycle. Every time a person lies, they have to expend energy maintaining that lie, fearing exposure. And the more they lie, the stronger their fear of being exposed becomes, which, in turn, further undermines their self-esteem and makes them lie even more. Such lying becomes not just a tool, but a part of the personality that is formed around this false image. In some cases, people lie out of a simple desire to manipulate a situation to their advantage. This is not always a pure manifestation of dark psychology, but rather an egocentric behavior where a person prioritizes their own interests over others without considering the consequences. For example, an employee might lie about the reasons for their low productivity to avoid responsibility and shift it onto someone else or external circumstances, even though they are to blame for the failure. Or a customer might invent non-existent problems with the product to get a discount or a refund, knowing full well that the product is in perfect working order. In such cases, lying becomes a direct tool for achieving a desired outcome, regardless of how it affects others. The motives here can be diverse, from a desire for material gain to a longing for power or control over the situation. Sometimes people lie simply because it seems like the easiest way out of a difficult situation. Laziness or unwillingness to put in the effort to solve a problem honestly can lead to choosing a lie. Why explain a complex situation when you can just say, "I forgot"? Why admit a mistake if you can come up with an excuse? Such a lie can be impulsive, thoughtless, and often the person themselves doesn't fully understand why they are doing it, simply following the path of least resistance. And finally, it's worth mentioning self-deception. Sometimes people lie to others for so long and so persistently that they begin to believe their own lies. They create an alternative reality for themselves in which their fabrications become truth, and this makes the lie much more convincing and easier for them to tell. This mechanism allows them to avoid cognitive dissonance, an internal conflict that arises when their actions diverge from their self-perception. By convincing themselves of the truthfulness of their fabrication, the person removes some of the moral burden and can continue to lie without remorse. Thus, lying is not just a good or bad action and not always a sign of malice. It is a complex adaptive mechanism that a person uses when faced with pressure, fear, a desire to protect themselves or others, when they want to look better, avoid conflict, or even when they are simply looking for an easy way out. Understanding these diverse reasons is the first and most important step to learning to recognize insincerity not as a manifestation of ill will, but as a signal of some internal state of the person and, more importantly, to build more honest and open relationships. We are not trying to justify lying, but to understand its roots in order to deal with it more effectively. After all, behind every lie lies some need, some fear, some desire, or even deep insecurity. And by understanding them, we can interact with people much better, helping them find healthier ways to cope with their difficulties instead of resorting to deception. Now that we've somewhat understood why people resort to lies, it's time to move on to the next important step. How to tell if you're being deceived. This is where the subtle art of observing a person comes into play. It's not about turning into a professional investigator or a movie detective capable of catching anyone out. Our goal is much simpler and more humane: to learn to pay attention to those subtle signals that the body and speech send when a person is trying to hide something. After all, lying is not just uttering falsehoods. It's a complex cognitive process that requires great effort from the brain and causes internal tension. And this tension often breaks through to the surface through various channels. Think about it. When you're telling the truth, your brain works on autopilot. You simply reproduce information that's already in your memory. It's easy, natural, and requires no extra effort. But when you lie, your brain has to do much more. It needs not only to create a new, fabricated story, but also to ensure it sounds plausible, doesn't contradict previous statements, and at the same time suppress true memories. It's like a juggler trying to keep too many balls in the air at once. Such a load inevitably manifests in behavior. Let's learn to pay attention to these red flags that indicate internal tension and an attempt to conceal something. It's important to remember that none of these signs individually are 100% proof of lying. They are merely clues that should prompt you to look closer and perhaps ask additional questions. One of the most obvious but often overlooked signals is changes in speech. For example, when someone suddenly starts speaking faster than usual or, conversely, slows down their speech, making unnatural pauses. This might be because the brain is either rushing to get out the fabricated story before forgetting details or, conversely, trying to buy time to come up with the next sentence. Pay attention to intonations. The voice might become higher or lower, a hoarseness or tremor might appear. Sometimes a person, trying to be convincing, uses too many details that seem superfluous for a normal story. I was there, and precisely at 2:37 p.m. when the sun was directly over that tree and the neighbor's dog was barking, I saw how. This might be an attempt to overload you with information to distract from the core issue or to convince you of the truthfulness. Conversely, a liar might be too vague in descriptions, avoiding specifics. Well, I was there, doing things, usual stuff. When you ask for clarification on details, they might start to get nervous or angry, trying to evade an answer. Nonverbal signals or body language can also reveal a lot. See how the gaze changes. People who lie might avoid direct eye contact, look away, or, conversely, stare too intently into your eyes, trying to appear honest. The latter is often seen in those who try to consciously control their behavior. Normal eye contact involves periodic shifts in gaze, but not a complete absence or excessive fixation. Pay attention to gestures. Do subtle movements appear that are usually absent? For example, a person might start rubbing their nose, adjusting their clothes, touching their face, neck, ear. These self-soothing gestures often arise from nervous tension. A liar might also exhibit blocking gestures, crossing their arms across their chest, placing objects between themselves and you, turning their body away. This is a subconscious attempt to wall themselves off from you and the truth. Sometimes, the so-called Pinocchio effect occurs where the temperature at the tip of the nose increases when lying and the person subconsciously reaches to scratch or touch it. Besides this, observe overall behavior. Does the person's posture change? Do they become stiff or, conversely, excessively relaxed? Does nervous fidgeting in the chair appear? Foot tapping? Pen clicking? All of these can be signs of internal discomfort and an attempt to suppress anxiety. It's important to emphasize once again, these are not 100% proofs, but rather red flags that indicate internal tension and an attempt to conceal something. Every person is unique, and their reactions can differ. Nervousness might be caused not by lying, but simply by stress from the conversation or natural shyness. Therefore, never jump to conclusions based on one or two signs. You need to look for clusters of signals, where several signs appear simultaneously, and compare them with the person's usual behavior. You know how your friend or colleague usually behaves. If their behavior sharply deviates from the norm, it's a reason to look closer. So, you've noticed some red flags. What next? How to act so that the person themselves wants to open up instead of closing off even more. Here, we move from observation to the art of dialogue. This is not about an interrogation where you pressure someone, demanding confessions, but about creating an atmosphere where telling the truth becomes easier than continuing the lie due to internal discomfort. The first and most important principle is calmness and composure. If you start to get angry, accusatory, or aggressive, the person will immediately shut down. Your goal is not to catch them, but to understand. So, keep yourself in check. Your tone and facial expression should convey not judgment, but rather slight bewilderment or misunderstanding. One effective technique is mirroring or rephrasing. Instead of accusations, you can simply repeat what you heard with a questioning or slightly surprised intonation. For example, if a friend says, "I was home all evening," and you suspect otherwise, you can calmly say, "So, you're saying you were home all this time? Did I understand that correctly?" Such repetition makes the person reconsider their words. Often, lies, especially spontaneous ones, have weak points. When repeated aloud, these weaknesses become more obvious even to the liar themselves, causing internal discomfort. They might start adding details themselves to make the story more plausible, or, conversely, stumble and begin to correct what they said. Another way is to ask about details that are difficult to invent on the spot. But this must be done gently without aggression. For example, what exactly were you doing at that time? Tell me more about. E.g., about the meeting they briefly mentioned. Liars usually prepare the main outline of the story, but they find it difficult to invent many small, consistent details that naturally fit into reality. If a person starts to get confused in minor details or their answers become too general, this could be a signal. It's important to ask open-ended questions that require a detailed answer, not just yes or no. It's also effective to use the unexpected question technique. At the most inconvenient moment, when the person least expects it, ask about a detail that seems unimportant but can actually expose a lie. For example, if a person is talking about an event that happened yesterday on Lennon Street, you could unexpectedly ask, "Oh, isn't there road construction there now? How did you get through?" If they are lying, they will have to come up with an answer on the spot, which might cause a pause or an illogical explanation. Sometimes it's enough to simply let the person know you've noticed their discomfort without directly accusing them. For example, you could say, "I see it's not easy for you to talk about this right now," or "You look a little agitated. Is everything okay?" This is an invitation to an honest conversation that shows you're not an aggressor, but rather someone willing to understand. Such a phrase can alleviate some of the tension and give the person an opportunity to open up as they realize they've been figured out but are not being attacked. They might feel relief from no longer needing to maintain the lie. Another subtle approach is to create an exit for the person so they can save face. For example, if you suspect a colleague hasn't managed to complete a task, you could say, "You know, I think this task turned out to be more difficult than we thought. Maybe you didn't have enough time, or some unforeseen difficulties arose. If so, I'm ready to help." In this way, you give them the opportunity to admit to the problem without feeling like a failure or being ashamed. It's like saying, "I understand that things happen, and if you made a mistake, it's not the end of the world." Remember, the key to success here is creating a safe environment for honesty. People don't lie for no reason. Often, they fear consequences, judgment, or loss. If you can minimize these fears by making it clear that you are willing to listen without prejudice, the chances of sincerity significantly increase. This requires patience and emotional intelligence, but the result is worth it. You not only learn the truth but also strengthen trust, showing that you are a person who can be trusted. Finally, we have come to the most important part, understanding and how to build long-term, trusting relationships. It is important to emphasize that our goal is not to turn into a professional lie detector, a person who constantly seeks deception in the words of others and lives in a state of suspicion. Our task is much broader and, strangely enough, more humane, to learn to better understand other people, their motives, fears, and internal conflicts, and, as a result, to build deeper, more sincere, and trusting relationships. After all, in the end, a lie, even the smallest and seemingly harmless one, always undermines the foundation of any connection, be it friendly, family, or work-related. It is like a slow poison that destroys trust, breeds doubt, and creates invisible walls between people. Remember empathy. Why did the person lie? What frightened them or made them resort to it? As we already discussed in the first part, lying is very often a defense mechanism. A person may lie out of fear of punishment, due to deep shame for their actions, out of a desire to protect themselves or someone else from pain, or even due to low self-esteem and the fear of being rejected. If you focus only on the fact of the lie without trying to understand the underlying motives and reasons, you risk alienating the person even further, making them withdraw, and possibly continuing to lie in the future. Instead of immediately resorting to accusations, try to put yourself in their shoes. Perhaps they genuinely found themselves in a desperate situation that they couldn't resolve otherwise, or they were deeply ashamed to admit something that seemed disgraceful to them. For example, if a friend lied about their financial difficulties, perhaps they feared not your anger, but your pity, judgment, or that you would stop respecting them and considering them successful. Perhaps they didn't want to appear weak or needy. Understanding these hidden motives does not justify the lie itself, but it helps you react to it more constructively with empathy rather than with anger. You will be able to see behind the facade of the lie a frightened or insecure person and not just a deceiver. Often, honesty comes not from pressure, the threat of exposure, or fear of consequences, but from a sense of security and understanding. When a person feels that they will not be judged, harshly punished, or rejected, it is much easier for them to open up and confess their actions. Imagine that you yourself were in a difficult situation and had to lie. What would make you confess? Threats, shouting, and accusations? Unlikely. Most likely, you would open up to someone who showed you compassion, understanding, and willingness to help rather than condemn. This is precisely the approach that should be applied. Create an atmosphere in which the person feels that telling the truth is safe, even if it is unpleasant, and that their revelation will be met with acceptance, not aggression. We will talk about how a sincere and calm dialogue, where you make it clear that you are willing to listen without judgment, is much more effective than aggressive pressure. There is no need to shout, raise your voice, use insults, humiliation, or manipulation in an attempt to extract the truth. Instead, maintain calmness and clarity of thought. Your words should be clear, but your tone soft and inviting. Use phrases that invite openness rather than cornering them. For example, "I value our friendship/relationship and it's important for me to understand what's happening. If there's something you find difficult to talk about, I'm willing to listen without judgment. My goal is not to accuse you, but to understand the situation and find a solution together." Such words build a bridge for communication rather than erecting a wall between you. Give the person an opportunity to speak. Sometimes the simplest thing you can do is just be silent and listen. Active listening means not only listening to the spoken words but also paying attention to the unexpressed emotions that lie behind them. Confirm that you are hearing them by using short but supportive phrases like, "Aha, I understand, go on, I'm with you." This lets them know that you are attentive and genuinely interested in their words and that they can trust you with their revelation. If the person begins to tell the truth, do not interrupt them, do not rush them, and do not express strong emotions even if what you hear shocks you. The longer they speak, the more details they themselves provide, the greater their chance of fully opening up and freeing themselves from the burden of lies. It is also important to set healthy boundaries. If a person confesses to a lie, it doesn't mean you should forget everything, pretend nothing happened, and immediately forgive them. Listening without judgment is one thing, but accepting lying as a norm of behavior in your relationship is quite another. You have every right to your feelings, disappointment, hurt, anger, and to determine how this lie will affect your future relationship. Say directly but calmly, "I appreciate your honesty now, and it's important to me that you opened up, but what happened has greatly upset/hurt/caused me pain. I need time to process this and understand how we will move forward." This will show that you take truth and trust seriously, and that lying has consequences, but at the same time, you are open to dialogue and possible reconciliation. Such boundaries are important for maintaining your self-respect and demonstrating that you value truth. Sometimes, even if a person doesn't admit to lying at that specific moment, your calmness, composure, and demonstrated understanding of their behavior will help you make the right decision about future interactions. You will be able to more soberly assess the level of trust in these relationships and decide whether to continue them in their current format, change them, or perhaps even end them altogether. Perhaps you will understand that this person cannot yet be trusted with important matters, but you can continue to communicate on less significant issues. Or, conversely, you will see that their attempt to open up, even if it did not lead to a full confession, is the first step towards rebuilding trust, and you will give them another chance, but with greater caution. Ultimately, this approach is not just a set of techniques for catching someone out, but a path to improving communication and strengthening bonds where trust is valued above all else. It teaches us to be more observant, patient, and empathetic, to see behind a person's behavior their true motives and experiences. Instead of playing detective, looking for culprits, and punishing, we become guides to sincerity, helping people free themselves from the burden of lies. This is not always an easy path. It requires emotional maturity and a willingness to face unpleasant truths, but it leads to healthier, more open, and stronger relationships where everyone feels safe telling the truth. It's about building a world where honesty is the norm, not the exception, and where people strive for openness because they know they will be understood, not judged.